some opposition parties say while they welcome President Cyril Ramaphosa's decision to ease COVID-19 regulations, it is time he completely lifts the national state of disaster. So last night, the President announced that Cabinet had taken a decision to ease most of the restrictions, which have been in place for more than 2 years now. Let's get you more reaction from political parties. We're joined by the UDM's leader, Bantu Holomisa, and Brett Herron, who is the Secretary General of the Good Party. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning. Mr. Holomisa, let's begin with you. The President obviously bowing to some pressure around the lifting of the state of disaster. He says he's unable to do so at the moment, given that public comment is still outstanding on the new regulations. What was your take on what he had to say last night?
I would say slowly we are getting there. It is a pity that in order for this government to listen to its citizens, they have to resort to either toy in the streets or go to courts. Currently, there is no disaster in South Africa. Why must we have a state of disaster? This should be lifted without delay so that people go back to their lives and save millions which are being stolen under this so-called state of disaster. If there will be an outbreak in future, then the government or the president can bring back the state of disaster or apply it. Right now, there is no need. Even the scientists are saying there is no need for this. And he should go further and disband the Corona Command Council, which has been running parallel to Parliament. Parliament has been kept in the dark. Vaccination programs can continue. After all, this vaccination program, if he had listened to the opposition parties last year, already around July, August, that the vaccine must be rolled out, more people would have been vaccinated. Instead, they ordered an obsolete vaccine in India, as you know. So we are saying, therefore, there is no need for this consultation he's talking about. Yeah. This is just a delay tactic. Yeah. Scientifically, he cannot prove it.
Brett Herron, Mr. Holomisa raises an interesting point there, and it seems obvious, doesn't it? Because in a context where we are trying to ignite much-needed economic activity, under the state of disaster, a lot of that economic activity has come to a halt, if not to a complete standstill. So if we lift the state of disaster, surely it's easy enough to lift it, and if there is another emergency response that is needed, it's implemented again.
Well, I think that for most of us, the last 6 months since we've been in adjusted level 1, most industries and sectors of our economy have been able to operate as normal. This is a global pandemic, so even the tourism sector is not only affected by the regulations that are put in place in South Africa, but they're affected by how the regulations are managed in other parts of the world when it comes to international travel. So I think that last night's announcement that the state of disaster will be completely lifted once there are health regulations in place to enable the state to take action when it is required is prudent. And I don't think that the argument that has been made that the state of disaster is somehow throttling our economy is necessarily true, given that I think most industries have been operating as usual over the last 6 months since we were in the very relaxed phase of the state of disaster. So I think that what the President announced last night is us moving to a place where we have learned to live with this virus, where we have a higher level of immunity in our country, where we have an okay level of vaccination, but most importantly, where the health systems are ready to deal with any further surges in the virus.
Yeah. Well, the eventing sector is one sector that springs to mind as one that hasn't been able to operate over the past 2 years at pre-COVID-19 levels. The space where people can buy tickets and go to sporting events, for example.
Yeah, I mean that sector is now unable to open up some more, so it does help the sporting, eventing, and entertainment sector. I mean, the City of Cape Town just hosted 22,000 cyclists in the Cape Town Cycle Tour, the Old Argus Cycle Tour. So I think that there has been some return to eventing. Where we're going to see a big difference is in stadium events.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Holomisa, you've got some sort of opposite views on what is the best way forward insofar as the lifting of the state of disaster is concerned, the UDM and the Good Party, that is. In terms of your views as the UDM around the lifting of the state of disaster, but also the disbanding of the NCCC, what kinds of behind-the-scenes discussions are taking place to that end?
Well, I don't know. We are not consulted as political party leaders. Fortunately, GOOD is part of the establishment, so they have got a better idea. But be that as it may, what we need to be careful of here is that if we are going to do our own regulations, especially on traveling, we have to be very, very careful, because other countries are lifting this state of disasters without conditions. And if now we are going to have stringent rules and regulations based on future of some kind of an outbreak which may come in future, the chances are that anyone who will want to tour Southern Africa, people will simply say, all right, I cannot be subjected to these stringent rules of South Africa. I will go to Zimbabwe, I will go to Botswana, I will go to other countries. So the tourism industry, especially that one, will still have to be monitored carefully. But GOOD and their friends, they can talk about the rules and regulations. The UDM feels that if the scientists and the doctors are saying there is no disaster, I can't see any need for it. I'm not changing our position.
Brett, are there discussions?
We had TB, HIVs. I think the government, the Department of Health, must just continue with their vaccination programs. There is no there is no COVID-19. COVID-19 was in 2019 and it disappeared in 2020. But the government opted to keep us under this, and it has affected a lot of people, especially the youth who is unemployed.
Brett, do you want to venture a reply?
Well, I mean, Patricia de Lille serves in the good in our country's cabinet, but that doesn't mean that we are in on all the regulations and rules and stuff. But I think that we mustn't make generalized statements. I think that the government has handled the management of this pandemic guided by science and medicine, and there are differing views in the scientific world, like there are in every profession. But the test really is to say, has South Africa acted in a way that is unusual compared to any other country? And I don't think that anyone can really say that. I think most countries have followed the same sort of path, so we're not an outlier. And I mean, as far as tourism is concerned, while South Africa's borders were open to tourists from around the world, I mean, South Africans were locked down, locked out of traveling to other countries, and those residents and citizens of other countries, if they visited South Africa, when they returned, they were confined to isolation. So the impact on our local economy is not only based on local decisions. The tourism sector was also affected by the decisions of governments like the United Kingdom that said to their people, you can go to South Africa, but if you come back, you spend 2 weeks in a hotel in isolation. So that was beyond South Africa's control. And that's why I say this is a global pandemic. Many of the sectors that were affected by the regulations would have been affected even if the regulations were not in place, because their own governments, especially the tourism sector, were imposing regulations that would have resulted in a fall in tourism anyway.
Well, certainly differing views on just exactly how we should go about around regulations, lifting regulations at this phase of the pandemic. Differing views in this conversation as well. To both of our guests, thanks very much for coming on and giving us your sense of how things are unfolding. The UDM leader, Bantu Holomisa, and Brett Herron, who's the Secretary General of the Good Party.